Welcome, everyone, to Ecopsychology Voices, an interview series with some of ecopsychology's luminaries. Hello, my name is Carol Koziel, and I'm the founder of the Canadian Ecopsychology Network, which is the host of the series. Today, Linda Bizel, our co-creator of Ecopsychology Voices, will be carrying the interview. Linda?
Thank you, Carol. I'm really excited to have Tracey with us here today. So I'd like to start out just by reading a little bio so that we all know that, her background when we have questions. Tracey Laszloffy, PhD, is the director of the Center for Relationship Healing in southeastern Connecticut, where she also maintains a full-time private practice. Tracey received her master's and doctoral degrees in marriage and family therapy from Syracuse University in New York. She has over 20 years of experience as a therapist and has been a professor of family therapy at Syracuse University, the University of Connecticut, Seton Hill University, and Alliant International University in San Diego. While she has published and presented extensively in the areas of healing the wounds of trauma and oppression, working with marginalized populations, and promoting culturally sensitive approaches to therapy, she feels especially passionate about her latest journal publication called Nurturing Nature, Exploring Ecological Self of the Therapist Issues. And her forthcoming co-edited book is Eco-Informed Practice, Family Therapy in the Age of Ecological Peril. These works reflect her deep belief that the field of family therapy must resist the temptation to conform with the individualistic bias endemic to mainstream mental health, and instead must remain true to its systemic roots by addressing the relationship between our health and well-being and that of the planetary ecological system. So welcome, Tracey.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
I'm really excited to be able to have this conversation with you. As you know, I'm an MFT as well. And I have been so frustrated by our field that, we were all trained in systems therapy and understanding how humans are connected in systems and that you can't heal a person separate from the system within which they're embedded. But it seems like we've had this myopia that the only systems that count are human systems. Mm-hmm. And we've been kind of oblivious to the fact that there's a whole rest of nature that we're embedded in. So I really am looking forward to hearing what your thoughts are on this.
Yeah, I was delighted to, meet you as a family therapist, because I have found that it has been so difficult to pursue these issues within the field of marriage and family therapy. And it's shocking considering that this is a profession that is founded in systems theory. So the theoretical underpinning is this notion that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. We're all interconnected. What you do to a part, you do to the whole. So I don't understand how we as a field can believe that and have had complete oblivion to the ecological system and our effect on it and its effect on us. It's shocking.
It really is. I mean, years ago, I submitted an article on this to the California Association of Marriage and Family Therapy, and there was literally no interest in the topic. It felt like nature has nothing to do with human mental and physical health.
I've had the same dilemma where I submit papers, I submit workshop, presentations, and they're always rejected. And when I talk to other therapists, what I frequently hear, like the common refrain is, look, I think that the environment is important and I do my part. I recycle and, I try to buy things in an ecologically responsible way. But what does it have to do with my work as a therapist? I'm dealing with people. Are you still there?
Yeah, we're here.
Okay. My screen blanked out. So, I'm dealing with people who are struggling with couples conflict or family conflict, or they're depressed or they're anxious. What does this have to do with ecological issues? And so it's been very difficult to help therapists understand how it's connected, let alone how to work with the ecological system in a way that is therapeutic for the clients that come to see them.
And I think this is just a huge issue. I always go back to the image of an animal locked away in a zoo, or perhaps even born into a zoo conditions, and how the animals in zoos often get really mentally unhinged from their situation.
Right.
And yet it's taken us so long to understand that humans, in a way, are in the same situation, that we often live in conditions that aren't appropriate for our particular species.
That's right.
And that we evolved to live embedded in the rest of nature in intimate daily connection with it. And that we've gone a little crazy because we've been separated. Not really, because of course we never can be separated, but just our day-to-day lives in a lot of urban environments are fundamentally unhealthy.
There's a definite detachment that has occurred within modern, industrial societies where we don't interact with nature on a regular basis. And, our ancestors for, millions of years had a direct, meaningful, sustained relationship with the rest of the world around us. And now we live in cubicles and in artificially lit and, climate controlled spaces, and we're attached to devices all the time. So psychologically, we don't recognize our connection to the trees and the grass and the other animals. And, it's not healthy. It is a form of insanity, which we don't recognize. And I think we suffer from the effects of it in ways that we don't recognize. Some of our depression, some of our anxiety, some of our irritability, some of our difficulty sleeping, some of our physical illnesses are tied to living in a disconnected state.
Yes, exactly. And also, I think violence is an important issue to look at.
Yes.
Violence against ourselves, against other humans, against animals, against plants, against the planet.
Right.
But there's something about these nature disconnected conditions that turns us into, violent creatures that perhaps we might not be as violent if we were living more nature connected, place connected lives.
Absolutely. And I agree with you, because part of the disconnection is, Azerwald talked about that we lived in a mechanistic paradigm. And it's this idea that we view the world in terms of parts, and that we see the relationship as linear cause and effect rather than recognizing our interrelatedness and that everything is circular. And because we have made everything into parts, we also arrange those parts hierarchically. So we attach differential value to things that we rank up here versus down here. So humans are better than other animals, and society is superior to nature, and men are better than women, and white people are better than people. It's all the same psychology around hierarchical dualism, which is about dominance and exploitation. And so you're right, violence is the inevitable consequence of that type of mind structure.
The only marriage counselor I know of who's been using this eco model to work with couples is George Burns in Australia, who's been doing this for quite a long time, where he's giving nature prescriptions to couples, having them go outside, and apparently he's been getting really interesting results.
Yeah.
If anyone else, are you using the nature prescription in your work?
I do it myself, but I don't know anyone else who does it other than my colleague now, who I wrote the article with for JMFT, said, now that we're working on this, I'm doing more of it because I recognize how good it is for people. That there's two things that happen when people come to therapy. First, we have to ask ourselves the question, is part of what they're struggling with connected to a loss of connection with nature?
Right.
Part of a lost connection to nature, why they're here in the office and they don't know that. But even if it's not, using nature or having people interact with nature in a meaningful way is always therapeutic. So I think it should always be a part of the solution, as much as we can make that possible. And so I do a lot of nature prescription work with clients, getting them out there into, open spaces and greenery, and having them meditate and reflect and leave their devices and engage in activities with each other and the outdoors. And it's tremendously therapeutic.
Yeah. Richard Louv has written a lot about what he calls nature deficit disorder, and his focus, at least originally, was on children, that in terms of family well-being, the way we're raising children, the way children are kind of locked up indoors, whether it's school or at home, hooked to their devices, not growing up in a natural way. How can Richard Lou's and your ideas be put into family therapy. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I love Richard's work, and I think he's dead on, that nature deficit disorder is real. And, it's not just children who suffer from it, adults do as well.
Right.
Part of the solution has to be getting people outside into natural spaces where they have meaningful connection with what's happening around them. Because it's possible to go outside, and if you bring your device, you're still disconnected.
Right.
If you're not, bringing your sort of mindfulness to the moments, that you're not really aware of what's happening around you, in the greenery or in the rocks and in the other animals. And so I think it's about bringing a mental state with you that's about connection. And so I often have people do things like gardening, nature restoration projects, daily walks. And for people who live in more urban spaces, it's more difficult, but not impossible. There's the park that they never paid attention to that I say, well, you've driven by it, for 10 years now. Maybe it's time to get out of the car and walk through it. And so I think that those types of things are very helpful. And in summer, when it's warmer here, I do go outside with people. And we have to be cautious about finding private spaces where, no one can be heard or seen. But it's been wonderful to be outside with people and actually walk with them through the woods while we're having a therapy session.
Yes. Yes.
It's wonderful.
Yeah.
And with families, I found it's also very useful to have them do activities together, because a lot of the things that families struggle with are around communication and around different ideas that people are, knocking heads around. So there's conflict. And so we do a lot of team building work with people outside, because it's a way to get families reconnected, work as a team, find ways that they can cooperate, use their communication skills so that they understand each other while they're working on activities that involve the natural spaces around them.
I noticed that you're a professor of marriage and family therapy in a number of places. How are these sorts of ideas being received at the various schools? I mean, is this going to be part of the training of marriage and family therapists in the future?
Great question.
Or are people still kind of oblivious to what this can offer?
Yeah, I have found it's a very hard sell. Certainly, I've been out of academia now for a number of years, but during the years that I was there, everyone thought that was a nice idea, but it didn't go very far. I believe that the tide is starting to change. I'm hopeful. And the book that I'm working on with Marky Twist, that was advanced to us by Carmen Knudsen Martin, who said, we need something like this out there. And we take this very seriously at the school that I teach at. And we actually have coursework in family therapy that addresses ecological issues. And this is probably part of the wave of the future. So, it's going to change.
It has to. And I'm glad you're writing this, because this gives us a textbook.
Right.
That we can have students read.
Right. Yeah, I feel good about that there's something out there that's specific to family therapy.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, because it's a very specific profession, and it's quite different from more individually focused therapeutic methods.
Yes.
Yeah.
And isn't it ironic, though, that psychology, which is, by its nature, an individually focused profession, has done so much more around recognizing the connection that individuals have to the nature around them, so to speak? That's always been amusing to me, that family therapists and systemic practitioners haven't made that connection.
I know, it's really odd. It's not like ecopsychology is something new. I mean, it's new in Western culture since the 90s, but that's quite a while ago.
Right.
And we're still acting like this is a brand new idea.
So true. Very true.
Yeah. Okay, well, let me ask you some of these questions here.
Okay.
What would it look like to adapt a systemically based approach? If you have any more thoughts on the specifics, so that therapists who are watching this can figure out, what could I try? What could I start with? So do you have any ideas?
I do. I think, the first thing that has to happen is there has to be a mental shift. There has to be that the self of the therapist has to recognize we are all interrelated, and this has to be an important part of how I understand and approach the problems that people bring to therapy. With that said, then I think there always has to be the question of how is the presenting problem potentially related to a disconnection from nature or not enough nature contact? And even if it's not connected, how could contact with nature be part of whatever the therapeutic interventions are? So I think that has to be the first thing that therapists bring to the equation, is that question and that openness to bringing nature into the room or getting people outside of the room into nature, whether it is or is not tied to the presenting problem. I also think that therapists have to be attuned to the dangers of technology, because this is a huge problem. Part of our nature disconnection is fueled by what cellist Glenn Denning talked about, a techno addiction, and that we are a technologically addicted society. And it's dangerous. I mean, we are like rewiring our neural pathways, through our addictions to screens. And it's particularly harmful for children. So I think that we have to ask questions about how much time individuals and families spend attached to their devices. In particular, we should ask those questions where children are concerned. Mm-hmm. And how can they make designated spaces where they disconnect from technology and reconnect with nature? So the whole technology part of it is significant and has to be challenged. We cannot have this kind of addictive relationship without asking ourselves, what are we losing as a result of that? So I think we should ask those questions. What are we losing? We should ask clients those questions. I had a couple in yesterday, actually, and when I raised this issue, the husband got very tense because that's how deep his ties are to his devices. So when his wife said, well, actually, I would really love it if you would not have all three of your devices on the table while we're eating, because can't we just have that as family time? It was hard for him to accept that as a reasonable request. He got there, but his initial instinct was terror. Oh my goodness, I won't have my three devices on the table with me. So it's challenging, but I think we have to be the ones who raise those questions with clients. I also think we have to be curious about how environmental toxicity may be related to some of the complaints that people bring to therapy. That, we're all being polluted on a daily basis. Exposure to, cosmetics and detergents and countertops and mattresses and upholstery. I mean, all of these things have chemicals in them that human beings weren't exposed to, 200 plus years before. And how can we not think that's not affecting our mental and our physical health? So I think we have to be curious about environmental toxicity. You have to work with other professionals that specialize in assessing environmental toxicity and in treating it. So I work with a couple of naturopaths who specialize in environmental toxicity. And in a number of cases, it's proven very helpful with people who are struggling with things like irritability and depression and anxiety and difficulty concentrating, that when we detoxify their systems, they do better.
That's great, yes. And I like your idea of it starting with the therapist's own work, that we have to break the paradigm away from what I call the big lie, that we're somehow separate from the rest of nature.
Right.
It's like if we do that inner work ourselves before we even go into the therapy room, then at least we can be more open to understanding some of the issues that you're raising.
Yeah, I agree with you that, the self of the therapist is a very central part of my approach to therapy, that, it's what we see and don't see and what we do and don't do is informed by who we are and what we believe and what our history and our experiences have been. And so if we don't work with ourselves around our own biophobia or our own disconnection from nature or our own addiction to technology, how can we help our clients do that? So we really have to start with self.
So coming back to this techno addiction, do you see it as a real addiction, as real as to drugs or alcohol? And how can it be treated?
Yes and no. So I certainly think that there are ways in which people have intense attachments to technology that I wouldn't put under the category of a strict addiction. Although I have seen cases that I would say that's not any different than, the person dealing with alcoholism. And it's particularly true, I have found this with children, which is really scary. And, they've done some very disturbing neuroscience around this, that neuroscans of the brain, and that technology activates the same region of the brain that things like cocaine do. So To expose this screen exposure for young children is neurologically damaging. And when we try to detach kids from their devices, we find that they go through the same types of withdrawal symptoms that people do when they're trying to get away from other addictions. And it's very difficult.
Well, just winding up here, I wanted to ask you what you would have to say to other marriage and family therapists and marriage and family therapy professors out there. What do they need to hear?
They need to remember that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, that we got into this because we believe in context and relationships and the interdependence of all life. And so if we believe that, if that's what drew us to this profession, and I believe for every MFT, that's what drew us to it, then we have to find ways to live that, not just as part of our practice, but our life. That we have to be, Carol, it's what you were saying in the beginning, that is it personal or is it professional? Well, it's all interconnected. It's all interconnected. So I think we have to ask ourselves questions about, what are we eating? Because I'm a vegetarian because I believe that we're contributing to environmental destruction, not just the abuse of other living beings, when we eat animals that come from factory farms. So I think we have to ask ourselves those hard questions about how can we adjust our lifestyle so that it is eco-informed and eco-sensitive, and then how can we practice in ways that acknowledge the ecological context is central to our health and well-being.
Well, thank you so much, Tracey. I know we're going to stop the recording now and there'll be lots of questions.